All right, all right. Let's get ourselves rocking and rolling here, and we can go live. Got the wheels spinning. All right, awesome. Well, folks, welcome in. It is Wednesday morning, the 5th. Happy belated Mardi Gras Fat Tuesday to everybody in the chat. Yeah, for those of you who celebrate, I gotta admit, Eric, I'm getting a little washed. So the thought of being up and partying and staying up to all hours is terrible. But at the same time, I'm as a consumer of adult beverages from time to time, the aspect of the day drinking sounds great. So I'm here for that. That would be a good time. I'm bed by 9 o'clock. I can get all my stuff done in the sun. Much more preferred. The staying up till 4 a.m. Absolutely not anymore. I'm washed.
I mean, I stay up to, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning pretty
Rock.
regularly, but that's insomnia more than anything.
Ugh.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I would much rather be in bed. I mean, we're in bed by like 8.
Oh
We're in
man.
bed by 8 and trying to get to sleep. My wife's normally asleep by 9, but she has to get up early to work. I mean, she just left just a couple minutes ago. So yeah, I was never that way really of staying up late to party. Unless you call staying up late on a game called Gears of War 2 till like 2 o'clock in the
I
morning.
remember that one. Yeah.
That was what I did.
Yeah. No, we were up grinding film, getting ready to talk Broncos takes, educated draft takes for you guys. No doubt about that. But appreciate everyone coming in. Let's get it going here. David Youngkin in the house. I could see Broncos not making a big splash in free agency. Yeah, we are. Is it officially 1 week away from
Yep. It's next
free
Wednesday.
agency officially opening? So Monday at noon or whatever is legal tampering. If you say that, Scott's about to strangle you through the screen. So I always like to bring that one up as one of his favorite buzzwords. And then the free agency actually opens up. So we're going to get a lot more news and have a much better idea of the directions the Broncos can go. As far as a big splash goes, I mean, it's always one of those things like, what is your definition of a big splash?
Yeah.
This is not a very good free agency crop this season. A lot of teams have way more cap space than they're available. So I'm wondering if you're going to see teams not spending, if you're going to see massive overpayments. I do expect the Broncos to sign 1 to 2 starters with some rotational guys as well. Walk away with, 5 free agents. The Broncos do enter, I believe, this offseason with one of the highest number of players under contract this offseason because they have so few guys actually hitting free agency. But yeah, well, I think they will make one or two moves that'll make some ripples, but you're not going to see them make any market shifting moves for any position, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you said. What is your definition of a big splash? For me, it's decently sized contract at the very least for somebody who's a starter that's going to have a ripple on the market. I think Denver makes at least one of those. Now, there's a question on if the guy who I think hits the market or not. There's been a lot coming out of Philadelphia that they're not really working to re-sign him. That's Zach Bond. That their attention has been elsewhere. They're really focused on landing a certain star pass rusher from a certain colored team. The Cleveland Browns, of course, Myles Garrett, if that wasn't obvious. So I think they could do that. I think they're going to be pretty involved in the safety market. Now, do I think they make a big signing there? Do I think they go get a Justin Reed or a signing like that? No. The name that's been thrown around a lot, Mike Klis is thrown around a lot. Cameron Bynum from the Minnesota Vikings. He's the popular name there. He's a guy who's a starter on this team. He's not the best safety in the world, but he's a significant upgrade over PJ Locke, doing as a better version of PJ Locke. So I think those are the way they go. I mean, we can see a receiver signing. I think they're going to go after a tight end, Jawan Johnson. I think they're going to be active in free agency. I don't know if they're going to go out and go on a spending spree, spend like crazy this free agency, but they can. They're not being held back because of salary cap space or cash on hand. They have plenty of both, and they have an easy way. They're sitting at like $42 million in salary cap space. Very easy to work around with rich owners. We've talked about that before. But they can easily get up to $65 million in cap space with just 3 simple restructures.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, the other thing we talked about, not a good free agency crop, but the Broncos have a lot of cap space. A lot of teams have a lot of cap space, and they have a lot of cash on hand with the ownership group. I think instead of it's kind of like when you're upset about your world and surroundings, look inward, right? Look inward. That's what we need to do with the roster. I think a lot of the money, look inward. Cortland Sutton, Zach Allen, Nick Bonito, John Franklin Myers. I think a lot of those guys are the area that If Broncos have cap space, maybe you get a year ahead of that. It's kind of been the MO. The one where they dragged their feet a little bit was Garrett Bowles, but a lot of these other guys, Quinn Miners, Patrick Surtain. Now it's not exactly 1-for-1 because some of those guys we mentioned all third contracts besides Benito. So maybe, we'll see what they're asking for and everything. Sutton's is a little bit of a scary one given his age and what the wide receiver market looks like as well. That one could be weird. But as far as big splash, I'm expecting a tier relative to the market. Yeah. I'm expecting a tier 1 signing at linebacker or safety, and then flip-flopping that, a tier 2, tier 3 signing at linebacker or safety, depending on what the tier 1 signing was. So that's my expectation. Then you get some filler. I'm expecting 2. They will sign like a tier 3 or 4, 2 of 3 out of wide receiver, running back, or tight end. And they're going to bring in a 0-1 technique for a Malcolm Roach-esque contract. That's my expectation right now. Also, punter. We'll see what happens with punter, but can't forget special teams. That's in there too.
And one thing when you're talking about the Broncos own free agency or for own free agents, or impending free agents, guys like the Cortland Sutton, John Franklin-Myers, Zach Allen, Nick Benito. One thing that with them is when they get extended, it is very, very rare that their salary cap year 1 or year 0 is what it's technically should be called, which would be, the 2024 or 2025 cap hit for them rarely does it go up. Most times you actually see it go down. So they can still go out and re-sign those guys and have their bigger cap hits be next year, where the Broncos are projected to have like $70 to $80 million in salary cap space when Russell Wilson is completely off the books. And you can go make those signings as well and have them have that lower cap hit this year and then still have a pretty decent cap hit. And you can work around it like that. And so that's one of the things with having those rich owners really allows you to be able to do.
Yeah, without a doubt. So will Denver be the most flashy, splashy spender this offseason? I don't know about that, but we'll see what happens. We got our guy, Jason Bonnie, says, good morning. I agree. Hopefully they'll sign at least a linebacker. We got Todd Ostendorf coming in here. Good morning. Good to see you. Of course, great to see you. Mike Thompson, Denver will sign 1 or 2 big names, fill the roster out and have a fun draft. See, Mike, I think Denver will sign some guys here, but like how many actual big names are even hitting the market? I mean, that's coming out of the combine. Everybody's kind of pooping themselves about the how bad the free agency crop is. So we'll see. What depends on what you qualify as a big name. We got our guy Roy coming in. Good morning. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. He said he's at home because of an ice blizzard. Yeah, crazy weather. I don't know if you were missed it. It's over like the Heartland, and I mean, really huge. Like then West Coast Alaska, I think we're okay, but essentially a hurricane. So hopefully everybody's okay there. Some crazy videos coming out. Michael Ronquillo, heck yeah, our guy coming in with the stars. Thank you so much for supporting the show, getting up here early, hanging out with us with the support. He says, good morning, Nick and Eric on Broncos for breakfast. Go Bo Broncos. Go Michael. If you guys want to be like Michael, we always appreciate that coming in with support. Kind of like Troy here. My gosh, talk about some support. $49.99 in the spirit of Mardi Gras, Troy. No, I'm just kidding. Earn some beads for that $49.99. I'll do it for money, or I'll keep it down for money. Either one. Cannot usually listen live these days, but appreciate what you guys do. Thank you so much. He said, "What's with Lil Jordan Humphrey becoming a tight end rumor?" I know that some people in Denver media have been talking about that a good bit. To me, he essentially was a tight end last season. He played the F role. Maybe there's going to be a little bit more weight added and a few more inline snaps, but when you're talking about 12 personnel with a detached tight end, F, whatever you want to call that, that's essentially what it already was. So what he's categorized as, I don't really know. I don't really care. I already had him that way in my mind. But if he adds, 10 more pounds, maybe they get a little bit more inline / H-back versatility with him as well. But his role essentially was the F tight end detached from the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, thank you, Troy, so much for that. We appreciate it so much. And as for this, I haven't heard specifically, him moving to tight end, but as you said, that's what his role was essentially, that detached tight end. And if they want to do it, all right. He's one of those guys that if he's on the roster, he's on the roster. If he's not on the roster this next year, he's not on the roster this next year. He's not a needle mover for me, and he wasn't this last year. He was kept around for that blocking role, and he didn't do a good job at it. That big slot blocker didn't do a good job at it. And then he had some, multiple issues with his hands. And so it's just, to me, if they're talking about it internally, it seems more of a thing of, we're trying to figure out what to do with you, as kind of a last ditch effort to figure out what to do with you kind of thing.
At this
But
point, little Jordan Humphrey, sorry to cut you off, but it's entering the season last year or this season, I think the same as last season. He's going to be a practice squad guy who gets the elevations and has a very specific role and niche for this team. And you're going to have a hard time with me getting upset about somebody that's a non-active player that's elevated and potentially gets a spot with injuries coming arise. So again, he essentially kind of played that last season. The name to keep an ear out for is Alan Lazard. He essentially plays that exact same role. If they're moving Humphrey inside a little bit more, Will Jordan, Humphrey inside a little more, maybe you have a role for Alan Lazard. We'll see what happens. I don't know if Denver would trade for him. Maybe it's something similar with the Jets last season where you gave a future day 3 pick for John Franklin Myers and changed the contract a little bit. But Alan Lazard is somebody I'm keeping an ear out for. Sean Payton's already tried to get him 2 off seasons in a row. I think 3 for 3 makes sense there as well. But yeah, an interesting rumor, no doubt. And again, it's so kind of was a complaint with Sean Payton early last season, just how much he was rotating personnel, right? And that's just something he wants to do. He's got these very specific roles and niches for these different players. So there's a role for that. Again, I think Will Jordan Humphrey, though, is more of your elevated practice squad kind of guy who has a role on the team. But I think he was, Eric, your number 2 snap getter out of your wide receivers or tight ends last season as well. Definitely out of your wide receivers after Cortland Sutton. Some of that was because Vele got hurt. Mims, kind of a gadget player, but he has a role. We'll see what happens there. And gosh, Troy, thank you so much. You're making us go from underdog to top achiever here with a super chat like that. But speaking of underdog, we got to get to our very thankful, who we're very thankful for, sponsor today.
yes, thank you so much, Underdog, for the sponsorship. But this basketball season, when your favorite star scores a bucket, we're going to give you an alley-oop opportunity to win money from watching sports with Underdog. Underdog is one of the leading sports apps, and you can play now in your state. Do you want to win up to 1,000 times your money? Well, guess what? You can with Underdog.
Yeah, absolutely. To play, choose whether a player will go higher or lower on one of their stats, such as points, assists, rebounds, and more. Underdog's got all your favorite leagues, teams, and starts to choose from. Create entries with all your basketball picks or mix and match across other sports as well. You can play with just as little as $1, and if you get everything right, you can get 1,000 times your money. So turn just $1 into 1,000 with just your hoops knowledge.
So download the Underdog app and sign up now using the promo code MHuddle to unlock a special offer of up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you make your first deposit. Join in on the fun when you sign up with promo code MHuddle. Claim your special offer today and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly upon your first deposit.
Must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama, Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, and 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call a 24/7 Hope line at 1-8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. So moving on here, we got more super chats coming in. You guys are fantastic. Comments coming in. I see Pearl's in the house. Hi, running late. Pearl, one of these days you're going to be early. I appreciate you. No, it's okay. Hope you're doing well. We got Mike Thompson says, Eman Worry with Patrick Surtain in our pass rush could be a lot of fun. Yeah, we talked about this a lot last night. Jordan Reed mocked Eman Worry to 20 overall. It seems like coming out of the combine, he's expected to be a top 20 pick. There seems to be growing sentiment that 13 overall with the Miami Dolphins is an area to have matched. I wouldn't say put it in pen. We're still 50 days away from the draft, but that's one that coming out of the combine, they're going to let Javon Holland walk and test the waters. Warren at 13 makes some sense. But yeah, 20 overall, it would be a lot of fun. And one of the big takeaways I had last night talking about this with Carl is that the first round, you're looking for long-term building blocks. And I like to use the championship roster formula that Move the Sticks Daniel Jeremiah used. I think he set up 4 or 5 years ago. Now it's different from team to team, but you want a quarterback, 3 offensive linemen, 2 to 3 weapons, 2 to 3 defensive linemen, and 3 back 7 players that are building block players. And when you look at the Broncos back 7 right now, they're good last season. You only have one building block player. Now you could argue to some degree, Brandon Jones, good player. Is he a building block, Pro Bowl caliber guy? I don't know. Riley Moss, I want to see another year still. Go Hawks. Really think he looked great for his first season, but I don't want to see it again. So right now you really only have one true building block in the back 7. it's a viable pathway for the Broncos at 20 right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a interesting discussion, because when you look at the archetypes the Broncos have in at safety, especially, Amenwari is not the same as Brandon Jones, but they do have their similarities. I mean, they're not the most rangy guys on the back end. I mean, you can do some cover two or split safety stuff too high, but they both, and you can also sneak them down a little bit pre-snap, and you can get some versatility that way. So there's a little bit of a what's the right word
Redundancy?
here? Yeah, a little bit of a redundancy with them. And from what it sounds like, when I listen to what Mike Kliss has to say, when I listen to what other reporters have to say about what they're looking at safety, Amenwari isn't that type. They seem to be wanting a guy with more range on the back end who can do some of this cover high one when they shade down the other safety, and they're giving this cover 3 look. They want that safety with range, and I like Amenwari. You and we've talked about him a lot privately, and I think he's got decent range. I don't think he has a whole lot of that single high type stuff that you can see nowadays, and so it's just a little bit rough that way. But if Vance Joseph is wanting to stick with more too high stuff, which is what Sean Payton wants. Sean Payton wanted his defense to be a more too high look. Then maybe we could see that if Sean Payton is going into this fact of, hey, we're going to take this guy, he's a great player. Even if Vance Joseph is going to use some, that cover 3 with some of that single high stuff, moving that safety, rotating that safety down, will he be here next year? And if it's another great year, Vance Joseph is likely going to get a head coaching job. And if he falls short, we could see Sean Payton say, hey, it's time now. We're going to move on. I'm going to bring in somebody who is going to do what I want to do. So you can't I've made this mistake plenty of times in the past. Patrick Surtain, I'm infamously was all about the scheme fit aspect of it. Wasn't a great scheme fit, and I was, to put it bluntly, stupid about it. So I don't want to get too caught up in the scheme fit with Amenwari, but I think that is part of the discussion, and it just really depends on what Sean Payton's view with the defensive side of the ball is going to be over the next year and a half.
Yeah. Have Ernie up for a second. Do want to say hello to Ernie. Hello, Nick and Eric. Go Broncos Country only. Appreciate you, Ernie, coming in. I love the energy. We got the news today. Joe Thuney is getting traded to the Bears. Chiefs offensive line gets weaker. Yeah, it sounds like, oh my gosh, Eric, I'm really appreciative of you for this, but I'm so bad at it. The names, Kingsley.
I never learned how to say his last name properly.
Okay, Kingsley Sumata-Ia. I'll
Something
give it my best shot there. From BYU, he started at left tackle for them last season early and stunk and got benched. Sounds like the plan is to move him to left guard, which still leaves a massive opening at left tackle for them. Chiefs kind of had to do it with trading of Trey Smith and how much they're already paying Creed Humphrey. And it makes sense for the Bears, who are, now becoming an Ashton Jeanty spot at 10, potentially with adding Donovan Jackson and Joe Thuney here. They still could go tackle Will Campbell, Simmons, Membu, although it sounds like Membu is going to go top 6, top 5.
Like he'll be the first all taken.
I could see Campbell or Membu, depending on what teams love Campbell still, how he's made up. I mean, he's got such a high floor. So 4 or 5, I think those could both be, depending on what happens with 1, 2, and 3, those could both be offensive linemen. But getting too far ahead of ourselves does change the math a little bit for the Broncos at 20 potentially. So we'll see what happens. Got our guy Michael Latsky coming in. Michael, again, I've been giving you major props on all the shows so far. Michael sent me a care package from Puerto Rico with a bunch of island treats. The guava marshmallow moon pies are dangerous. I could sit down and probably eat 10 of those in one sitting. They're really good. So those are great. And also sent me a signed autograph wishing me a happy birthday from Iowa head coach Kirk Ferentz, which I'm just like blown away. Like, who do you know, Michael? I need to know these people too. That's amazing. But also Michael says, my brother who passed away a couple years ago is a huge Broncos fan, so I'll give you my support through my brother. Michael's a big Falcons fan. So I've been covering the Falcons with Scott as well. And man, I don't even know what to say, Michael. Appreciate you so freaking much. Hope you're doing well. Moving forward here, of course, as well. We talked about a little bit of those mock drafts last night on the show with Carl. I did want to get your temperature on it as well, the big 2. So a lot of people still mocking Colston Loveland to the Broncos. At the stock exchange, mocked Colston Loveland to the Broncos at pick 20. Had Kyle Krabs mocking Colston Loveland. But there's some momentum now that the big 3, who the Broncos fans are head over heels with in terms of Tyler Warren, Penn State, Colston Loveland, Michigan, and Ashton Jeanty, Boise State running back, are gone by the time the Broncos pick at 20. And that happened in these two mocks. We had Omarion Hampton go into the Broncos with Dane Brugler's mock. What are your thoughts on that? Omarion Hampton at 20 overall. I know that you are lower on him than consensus, even though there are some rumors coming out. He could be, some teams like him more than Jeanty. He's got more of a prototype frame than Jeanty. He's a good player. I don't think personally 20 is 10 picks higher than I'd like for him. I want to see what else is available at that point. It's a little bit more palatable with a slight trade down, in my opinion, but he's definitely getting some buzz right now, top 20.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I know I'm lower on him. I know that he's going to go much higher than I think he should. When I watch him, I did go back and watch him. He's no longer, I made a comment like about 2 weeks ago. Oh, he's not even in the top 3 rounds for me. I went back and watched him. He did move up a little bit. His athletic testing helped him a little bit. He's sitting right around that 55 to 64 range, like a late second round pick for me. Just so many vision issues and for him, and it's not something I can look past. And then you pair that with, there's other issues with it too. It's not just that. So I have serious concerns about his vision at pick 20. I mean, you said that's about 10 picks too high for you. That's about 20 to 30 picks too high for me. Before I could start being comfortable with it, 30 to 40, for me to be like, oh yeah, that's a good pick, good value. But he's one of those guys that just based on the conversations, based on, the of a bunch of stuff that's going around, a bunch of comments that are that have been made. He's a guy that I would not be surprised if he's gone in the first 32 picks. Like it's just one of those things of, I know I'm lower on him than the consensus is. I know I'm going to be off with it, and it'll take 3 to 4 years to see who was accurate with it. So at 20, I get it, but it's not the pick that I would go make, obviously.
Yeah, we'll see what the Broncos do there at 20, but it does seem like there's some momentum. And one big thing about Omarion Hampton is that, and Dane Brugler kind of talks about it, the Broncos are looking for a joker, but you listen to Sean Payton, you listen to George Payton, and everybody who talked with anybody related to the Broncos coming out of the combine, they aren't happy with anybody in their running back room right now, feeling good about the position. So you have, obviously, Jaleel McLaughlin there, you have Audric Estime there, but the consensus coming out of Indianapolis was that Denver could go any direction at running back and it would make sense. So, and the contemporary example is the Lions with Montgomery and Gibbs. They keep talking about your Gibbs being your joker, although Sam Laporta is just as much of a joker for that Lions team, but I digress. They're also still looking for David Montgomery, and to compare that to Sean Payton's Saints teams, you have Deuce McAllister for a number of years. Latavius Murray was a hammer for them before, he kind of degraded a bit. You had, of course, Mark Ingram. You're looking for both those guys right now. So Hampton, he can take like the check downs and stuff. He's not going to be a joker by any means, but you're still looking for 2 starting running backs to this, and maybe Estime. Let's say Denver goes with Henderson second round, or you get yourselves, you sign Aaron Jones. Like, you can still squint your eyes and see Estime potentially being that guy, but he had a chance last season with his ball security issues and everything. It just does not seem like Denver is banking on him right now. Like, if there's somebody that they like more that becomes available, they will easily have them jump in front of Estime and have no qualms about it. So that's kind of where Hampton fits in here. We got Keith coming in, though, some news about former Broncos. He says Draymond Jones was released by the Seahawks. Yeah, I saw that as well. Denver, I know I like Draymond Jones. He did a good job for Denver, but not obviously for the scheme, a little bit overpaid, and now he's going to be looking for a new deal. I don't think Denver, with where they're at, he makes a lot of sense. Denver's probably going to be paying a 0-1 technique in free agency, not this 4-3 technique that Draymond Jones is, but wish him well, and happy for him that he cashed in when he did. So good for him. You sometimes only get that one shot. Make as much while you can, because as you can see here with him being released, there's no loyalty. So make what you can while you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of my misses. I was all about re-signing Draymond Jones and wasn't super high on Zach Allen, and well, now I was made to look foolish on that one. Draymond Jones, like, the scheme helped him out quite a bit. He was an ascending player, and he's just one of those guys where not every scheme is going to best utilize his skill set. And Seattle was one of those. And then you had on things where there was I mean, coming out of Seattle, there was a lot of talk, especially over the last year and a half, that, hey, he got paid. He's no longer putting in the work like he was. Just seemed to be like one of those guys, got that big contract. Now I'm going to ease up a little bit. And you can never predict that being an aspect of it. It's not something that you can. And it is one thing I got to say real quick that a lot of teams are talking about being happy for the NIL for, is you're starting to see that materialize at the college level before they're handing out the money. How many of these guys get those big NIL deals and still keep pushing? You can really evaluate how much they love the game, how much they want to play, which is helping with the evaluation for it. And it'd be interesting to see if we go back, 10 years ago with NIL over a few drafts, how different evaluations would have been with this, because there's a lot of guys that got paid and then they just eased up on their work and may not have loved football as much as you thought.
Yeah, and Todd coming in, I don't know if he's talking about Estime here. He says, I'm checking, I'm not seeing any fumbles for him. Estime had 2 fumbles early in the season. He had his fumble on his first carry where he got injured. He tried to hurdle that person in the Seahawks game. And he also fumbled versus the Saints as well. So those are 2.
I think he's talking about Cam Scatabo, because that was part of the conversation that was going in there. And for Cam Scatabo, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I froze.
I was going to say, for Cam Scatabo, he had a fumble 1 every 68.5 touches, which is 0.6 less than Ashton Jeanty. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, I think he had 4 fumbles this season, 2 the year before, and 4 the year before that at Sacramento State. And Scatabo, what I will say about him is, and I'm going to steal Sean's language here, following the Panthers game, he says you got to know when the ride is over. And it's part of what you get with Scatabo, trying to break those tackles and be a superhero. Some of those fumbles, it's like you need to protect yourself on the football and go down. So that's something I think it can be coached as well. But he's definitely around, I don't know, 70 or 85 feels maybe a little early for me with Scatabo, considering he's going to run like a 4.8. Eric, I don't know, but 4th round, I'm okay with it. I could see them in 3rd round too. 2nd round, definitely not for me. But yeah, there's a lot of options with the what are we calling it? I was going to say the unicorn, the Joker. Everyone drink. But moving on here, since we got another 15 minutes left or so, non-big 3 options at pick 20. So what are the big 3? You got Ashton Jeanty, running back from Boise State, of course, Tyler Warren, tight end, Penn State, and Colston Loveland, tight end from Michigan. I'll spoil it for you guys, despite it being behind a paywall. Both Dane Brugler and Jordan Reed had those players coming off the board at the exact same spots. So you have Jeanty going 6 to the Raiders, Warren going 9 to the Saints, and Loveland going 14 to the Colts. That seems very possible at this point. And Jordan Reed had him going. So we already talked about Hampton. I'm lukewarm on Hampton at 20. I get it. But with that said, with how deep this running back class is, like, do I like Hampton at 20 more than I like Judkins at 51 or Martinez, round 3, round 4? I don't know if I do. I think that's one, like, I don't think he's special enough specifically in the pass game where you can do a little bit of everything, or, the pass game exceptional, where I think I'd rather punt on the position and bring in one of those guys I just mentioned a little bit later if you're looking for that style of running back, a little bit more of the hammer as opposed to, the lightning guy, the David Montgomery archetype. But you have Jordan Reed going with the next guy I want to talk about here. We did a little bit. Amanda Worry, I'm definitely warming up to him, Eric. I know that Denver's probably looking for a little bit more of a true free safety type if they want to be playing cover 1 and cover 3 as much as they can. But at the same time, I think you can get away with it with both those guys. Maybe you can be a little bit versatile. And if you're getting pressure like Denver did this season, how often are they going to be in deep parts of the field for too long, right? Like, get home, you still got those guys. So I think that he's athletic enough with length that you can still get away with it somewhat. It's not ideal, but like, I like Brandon Jones. Is he keeping me from a higher rated player there at 20 and Amanda Worry if I love him? Probably not. I think you figure out different things. Denver 2 years ago tried to use a lot of different dime backer looks as well. I mean, how much penny did they try to use last season? Is that going to be the case again? I don't know, but Amanda Worry kind of changes what you can do up front with that as well. So, I mean, we saw it with PJ Locke. We saw it with Riley Moss. They were trying a lot to get 6 defensive backs on the field. So I'm okay with Amanda Worry at 20. It's not my favorite pick in the world. Safety is very devalued, but he is unique enough as a player Denver doesn't have a lot of building blocks back 7 outside of Surtain, like known building blocks. I'm okay with it at 20.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with it. And I mean, I just want to say this out there because I saw some of those comments about there is his 40 time that's not a good indicator of range when you're talking about on the football field. Just to throw it out there. There are some issues with his change of direction. He's not doesn't have the most fluid of movements, and that really does impact your range. But that 40 time is a translatable thing to recovery speed, which he maybe makes his change of direction in his zone a little bit slow, a little bit late, but he has the speed to make up for it. It's still not a great indicator of range, but it's something that he can do enough. And I was talking also about Brandon Jones and a little bit of redundancy. There's also the fact that Emanwari gives them options with Brandon Jones. He only signed a 3-year deal. He has this year and next year, and then he's done. And after this year, Denver can move on from his contract and decide to go a different way and save a good amount of money. So that is another thing with it. I like Emanwari. He's always been a guy for me at 20 that I would be fine with. I know I've talked about it at one point. I can't remember if it was on one of the morning shows, one of the shows with you, or Dove Valley Drivers before it. We put that on, on the back burner for now. But Emanwari was one of my guys that I wouldn't mind at all at 20. I like him. I like what he does. I like the athleticism. There are just some issues that I have when it comes to the scheme and everything that just raise a little bit concerns. And is he if the top 3 are gone, is he the first guy I would look at? No, but he's number 4 or 5 on my list. And, the guys above him, there's a reasonable expectation or reasonable belief that they could all be gone by 20 as well, making Emanwari the top option of who I wouldn't mind there at 20 available.
Yeah, we got Amy Alice coming in here saying, good morning, Broncos Country over on X. Good to see you, Amy. Appreciate you coming in. Jeremy comes in and says James Pierce Jr. So James Pierce is, you have your ears a little bit more to the ground than I do, Eric, but it sounds like he had a horrific combine, and it's potentially he falls out of the first round entirely because of football character and societal character questions. It sounds like.
Yeah. And one of the things that went around was he'll be there day 3. That was a comment that I heard a lot during the combine. He'll be there day 3. Day 3. So one of the, and I'm not exact, so I don't want to say it's not verbatim, but one of the things is that everything in Tennessee, the mood, the belief in themselves, everything improved when he was away. That he is just such a Debbie Downer that he drags everybody else around him. It's everybody else's fault beside him. Now, I'll believe he's there day 3 when I see it. It's one of those things where I think that at the very least, you get to pick 70 or so. Does a talent outweigh those concerns? I think that's where you can start seeing a team being like, yeah, I think it does, and take him there. So, I don't want to say he'll be there day 3 without a doubt, but that was just a comment that was said to me. Mm-hmm. Another comment was that he has the worst character grade out of anybody in this draft, which is saying something with the stuff that's coming out about Maxwell Hairston, the defensive back out of Kentucky, if I remember correctly. So that is pretty saying something, and teams have been aware of Maxwell Hairston for a while. Yeah. And so it's just one of those things where definitely not at 20, not for me at 51, at 85, without knowing all the details really of what's going in it, just having little tongue-in-cheek comments kind of made, maybe at 85, but there is a lot of concerns into it. And just real quick, Boggins, I got to bring Debbie into it. That's my mother. And my mother's definitely a Debbie Downer.
Yeah. Good skit. Good skit for SNL. So moving on 20. So you mentioned Emanwari. How are you on Malachi Starks right now? I think Emanwari is a little bit more special. Maybe I'm getting, the fell forward again sticker on me, falling for traits for a position where it's, instincts matter as much. But if we're talking defensive backs, Malachi Starks is probably for safeties, he's probably my 3rd option. Honestly, my number 1 might be Jahdae Barron. He's not as rare, but how he tested his ball skills, his versatility. I think he could play boundary cornerback. He could play slot. He could play safety. I like that a little bit more. I think there's a little bit easier long-term path to the field than those other guys. And given the instincts and whatnot, the ball skills, a good tackler, still all the same. I really like Jahdae Barron. I think he's probably as likely to be off the board when Denver's picking as a Manowari right now.
Yeah, Jahdae Barron, he's one of those guys I mentioned, Manowari being like 4 or 5. Jahdae Barron's one of those guys I would have above him. And I do say, and it's not, I don't dislike Starks. He's not my type of safety. But if he's there at 20, I can see that. All 3 of these safeties are quite different from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Jahdae Barron, he has that elite versatility really to play anywhere in the secondary. So you have that easier path to seeing him on the field. Malachi Starks, if you want range, Malachi Starks brings you that range. If you want, a guy who can kind of, handle tight ends in coverage, be that box safety, who can do some, 2 high stuff, a little bit more limited in the single high stuff, then a man warrior's a guy. So it depends on what skill set you're looking for, but I would not be upset at all if they looked at Jahdae Barron, and they decide that they don't want to use him at safety. They want to use him as a cornerback. Jaquan McMillan, he just got his exclusive rights tender handed out for him. Next year, I believe he's a restricted free agent. And then after that, their options for cost control go out the window. So it might be a little bit early, like a year too early to start thinking about, we're going to look at a Jaquan McMillan replacement, unless they start floating the idea of maybe we trade him, maybe we capitalize off of that, off his value being, it won't be any higher than it is now, because there is still a year of cost control with his play. So maybe that is something that they can look at doing. So I really like Jahdae Barron. I wouldn't be upset with Malachi Starks. I wouldn't be upset with the Manowari either. Any one of these safeties at 20, I'd be fine with.
And the thing about, I know there's been some talk about, Denver maybe going after Slay. I don't see them spending money on an old cornerback like that. But the reason that's even a possibility is that McMillan, Moss have the ability to play slot, potentially have the ability, to move to safety as well. So adding somebody like a Barron, I think Barron matches up, is comparable favorably to like a Brian Branch, so to speak, very tenacious for their size, and that versatility is key. And I just like he has a home, despite it's not like versatility where you're like Isaiah Simmons squinting your eyes, like maybe he could do this, and this because he's an athlete. No, there's proof of concept for him. And I think he's athletic enough. You could see the free safety stuff. You could see the slot stuff. You could see some of the, maybe not as much box as a Manowari, but I really like Barron. I think he's just such a useful player, such a high floor as well. And I look at Jaquan McMillan kind of like I look at Luke Wattenberg or PJ Locke, like good, useful player right now, not such a long-term building block that it's going to keep me from adding a guy that I love in the draft. So we talked about our secondary players here. Next up is linebacker. I'm going to spoil it here. I think that there's a good chance that Denver makes their big splash at linebacker, taking linebacker at 20 overall off the board. I still think day 2, day 3 conversations there because of Alex Singleton's contract and age. But you have Jalen Walker, who's a little bit unknown right now. He kind of scares me a little bit. I wish he measured a little bit bigger, but the character's off the charts. The closing speed is off the charts. Maybe ends up at edge like a Nolan Smith. Maybe he's a Hassan Reddick. I don't know. We'll see. And then you have Jihad Campbell, by most accounts right now. It's a linebacker from Alabama. Most accounts right now sounds like his floor is 19. Like if he's there for the Buccaneers, they're going to gobble him up. So maybe he's not really a chance there. But I think both those guys are intriguing at 20 right now before Denver signs a linebacker in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely with you. And both of them with their ability to, as pass rushers, both of them. I mean, Campbell was signed to Alabama, went to Alabama as an edge rusher, and then got moved back because they're absolutely loaded at edge rusher. They have that ability to blitz, which obviously is valued in Vance Joseph's defense. This is going to be a concern with Jalen Walker, is you are not going to get a chance to evaluate where you think he would be best at all during this draft process. Missed the combine with an injury, got hurt in training, he's going to miss the pro day. So teams are not going to be able to sit down with him, put him through a workout and figure out, we prefer him at linebacker, we prefer him at edge. And that is something that I know that a lot of people wanted to see from him during this draft process. So that is a big concern there. And then with Campbell, there's been a lot of comments going around that he's going to end up at edge, that he's one of those guys that's where he's just so much better coming downhill and being more attacking than working in coverage. And it's not that he's bad in coverage, but that you just want to use him at edge as a guy who can then drop into coverage from that, that strong linebacker spot. Think of like, the Leonard Floyd type edge rushers who give you a little bit of that versatility to help make things a little bit more complicated for opposing quarterbacks to get a read of the defense.
You don't think there's a chance he could end up being a the big linebacker from was drafted by the Bills and went to the Bears now, Edmonds, where like he's like got crazy length and there's pass rush ability there, but just because I feel like teams with less linebackers in the field, lighter boxes, the size and the length and drop zone coverage is becoming a little bit more valuable, especially if you're using sim pressures, where maybe there's still a pathway to that off-ball linebacker where there's some parts where you put him down, but still mainly living at. And I've heard it varies from team to team also, so we'll see. But I think that's for Denver specifically. His pathway and his prototype is Drew Sanders, but maybe with a little bit more instincts. We'll put it that way as the word I'll use for Drew Sanders. But we'll see. So moving on here. So we talked about secondary. I don't think we should spend too much time on it, but like boundary cornerback, it's just valuable enough. If Will Johnson falls, are we having a conversation? Is that something like we're having a conversation with Will Johnson? Is that okay? Tell me more.
I mean, it's focusing on why Riley Moss 2 years in, hurt both ears, missed time both years. Mm-hmm. Like it's that simple. Is Riley Moss was good when he was on the field before the injury last year. Afterwards, it looked like he wasn't 100% back. And it might have been a situation where if Denver already had a postseason spot locked up, or they were eliminated from the postseason, we may not have seen Riley Moss to close out the season.
Yeah,
that is concerning. And Chris Abrams-Drain, all right, I feel that he's going to have more of a life inside in the slot than on the boundary. And he can be one of those guys that, sure, he can play on the boundary, but he can be so much better inside. And then who else do you have? Like your depth guy is Chris Abrams-Drain. So yeah, you got to have that conversation. If a corner with as much talent as Will Johnson Johnson has falls, that is a conversation you have to have, because it's also exceeding that thing of just that pure value of the player. Even if it's not at a position of need, it's that value of the player falling into your lap that should always create a conversation within teams about taking them.
So I think boundary cornerback is probably not likely, but Will Johnson is just so unique, especially with how much Denver blitzes. You could even allocate more bodies to the pressure if you have somebody like that out there. Again, though, you have solid options there at cornerback, so I just think it's a little less likely. But again, we have to have that conversation, especially if the big three are gone. So defensive side of the ball, I think also you have to toss in edge rusher as well. I don't know if Mike Green will be on the board for the Broncos with his sexual assault stuff. And we'll see what happens with the Bears' 10th overall pick now. But I think the body types and the athleticisms and the skill sets of Mykel Williams and Shamar Stewart, if they fall to 20, we at least need to have a conversation. Right now, we're kind of wait and see what happens with Nick Benito. But let's say you heavier looks, you have Jonathan Cooper as more of your lighter body will, whatever you want to call it, and the strong side backer being a Mykel Williams or Shamar Stewart. You can play Stewart or Williams off of Benito. You want to play Benito more as a DPR on those early downs. I mean, he got crushed in that Bills game. So just having somebody with a much higher athletic strength profile and length profile would really change the dynamic of what you can do up front. So I think that those two, I'm expecting them to be gone by 20. Yeah. But if either of those guys fall, I'm interested.
Yeah, I mean, and it's this conversation that you have to have about options on players under contract already. With the way they structured Jonathan Cooper's contract, they can get out of it by the trade deadline this year, let alone after the season. And there's been some comments made that they may not have been overly enthused with Jonathan Cooper's play after he signed his extension. So, yeah, I mean, you could be looking at somebody to replace that. Nick Benito, obviously, he has his extension coming up. There's been a report that he's looking at $25 million on an average per year basis, which I think would be insane of Denver to pay, but that's neither here nor there at the moment. So it gives you these options with these contracts that you have of maybe that we go get this edge rusher, especially if they fall. And again, with Will Johnson, guys that you don't view as being there at 20, if they fall there, that needs to create a conversation. Otherwise, it could be a bad process, which, hey, it could still end in a good result, but it's still a bad process. So, yeah, with those guys, definitely. And with the way that Van Joseph does his front, depends on, I think Stewart might be a little bit more of an option depending on how they view him with his weight. If they view him a little bit playing as a little bit heavier, then he can be this guy that can be a little bit, stand up edge rusher, hand in the dirt defensive lineman type for him to give them more options with that defensive front. Because one thing that we do know with Vance Joseph is he loves to have options with what he can do with his defensive fronts, which we've seen over the last 2 years. And so, yeah, they got to be on the option because when you look at the way the Broncos roster is set, it's set for them to have that ability to take an edge and still be perfectly okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at 8:30 Mountain Time, so we got to wrap it up here pretty soon. But I did want to at least talk interior defensive line here. The big two, probably Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant. We'll see if either of them are available when the Broncos pick at 20. It does seem like Mason Graham's stock has taken a little bit of a hit coming out of the combine. Wayne wider, shorter arms, but I don't expect him to fall outside of the top 12, 15 for sure, still all the same. So we'll see what happens there with them. But Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan in play. I'm not sure that next crop interior defensive line are in play at 20. You're talking Harmon. You're talking Tyleik Williams, maybe Darius Alexander. I think those are more like somebody falls to 51 interested range, but 20 overall. Walter Nolan scares me a little bit. I think he's a great scheme fit for the Broncos, but his inability to anchor against the run and some of the character stuff is a concern even for a one-gapping team. But Kenneth Grant intrigues the heck out of me. I wish he'd have tested, but an athletic freak can play 3 technique, 1 technique, whatever you need. So if he fell to 20, I think that's one of my favorite, not big 3 Jeanty, Loveland, Warren picks for the Broncos.
Yeah, he is. And people should know by now, after the years of doing this, that I absolutely hate the idea of trading up in round 1. Absolutely hate it. Kenneth Grant is one that I would consider it for. If he somehow gets past pick 11, San Francisco, if he gets past that point, then yeah, I would start having those conversations and trade up, because he, to me, is a top 8 player in this class. He is one of the few guys that I have with a solid first round grade. And right now, I still haven't fully finished everything with the combine. I only had like 9 or 10 players going into the combine with first round grades. So he is one of those guys that I would consider trading up for. I like him a lot. I think Walter Nolan might be more closer to that second tier of guys, where maybe not at 20, but maybe we'll trade down a few. If they like Derek Harmon, they may have to take him at 20. As there's been a lot of comments about teams picking, about 23 to 28 or so, who absolutely love Derek Harmon. So they may have to take him at 20 if they like him, but there's also the option of trading back a little bit and still having, a good crop of defensive linemen, Tyleik Williams, Darius Alexander, who teams are not concerned about his age at all. Derek Harmon, again, talked about him. Walter Nolan could be part of that group. And there's a few other guys as well that are all part of that group of after a trade down. I think they'd be more likely than at 20.
Yeah. It's looking at the board, the next guys listed that are pretty high. Alfred Collins, already mentioned him. TJ Sanders is still thought of pretty high. I know you're not as high on him, but those seem more 51. Yeah. Offensive side of the ball, we've talked about it before. Gray Zabel, I think, is interesting for the Broncos at 20. It's probably a year early, a little high. I think I'd be more comfortable with a slight trade down if you went that direction. But after that, I mean, if your running backs and tight ends are gone, and we're not going to include Travion Henderson or Arroyo because of the injuries here at 20. If they had clean bills of health, I think they would be in the conversation more, but they don't. It's wide receiver. And wide receiver is like the dark horse in the room. I don't think we need to spend probably a whole episode talking wide receiver. There are 4 guys who are probably qualify at least for in the conversation at pick 40 with Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, Teteroa McMillan from Arizona, Matthew Golden from Texas, and Luther Burden from Missouri. All of them seem to be potentially in range at 20. All of them could be there. Only one of them could be there still. But with where the Broncos room is at, I know they keep saying they are comfortable with their wide receivers in the room, but Cortland Sutton's going to be older. We don't have a contract in hand yet. They don't have a wide receiver who can play the F role by any means. It seems like they prefer a tight end, but with how much Sean Payton and Sean McVay are talking these days, maybe he does want to do a wide receiver, the Sean McVay route with those guys as well. So I honestly, with how the board's falling, if Loveland and Warren and Jeanty are gone, I would love Teteroa McMillan. It gives you some coverage for Cortland Sutton long-term, and he can play, he blocks his butt off. I think you can go the 11 personnel that blocks like a spread 12 when you have somebody like Teteroa McMillan as that big slot.
Yeah, Teteroa McMillan, he's one of those guys that I really like. You and I, we talked about it during the season. I was really high on him. Started to fall off a little bit to close out the season and in January, but I still really like him. But he is a guy that is being talked about as could be a top 10 pick for one of these teams that needs another weapon. I mean, all the focus is on Ashton Jeanty for the Raiders, but Tedero McMillan has been a name that's been floating around with there. He's been a name floating around with the Patriots at what, pick 4 overall? That's where they're sitting, right? He's been a name floating around for the Jaguars, who sit at 5. So we could see him go there. Do I think that's where they will go? Possibly not. I think that defensive line or offensive line for the Jags and offensive line for the Patriots is more likely. So yeah, if he's there at 20, he's a guy that I'd consider. Emeka Egbuka, he's a guy that I would consider at 20, though I'd rather, trade down a little bit. Luther Burden, he won't be there at 51, but so he's another guy that I would consider trading down for and picking up. And then Matthew Golden, he is not a guy I would be considering for Denver, because if you want to talk about redundancy, and I know that, Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims, they shouldn't keep you from taking other teams, or taking you other players, but not a lot of teams think that way. So I'm not sure if Matthew Golden will be an option for Denver. I like him. I just don't think for Denver he's going to be, one of those guys that they're looking at.
And with how Jerry makes a good point here, with wide receivers costing so much in free agency, I think it's going to be unbelievable to see what mediocre guys are paid this offseason, because the desperation is there. Maybe that
Christian
causes
Kirk type contracts.
I think it's going to be nuts. But with the Calvin Ridleys of the world getting paid crazy money, but desperation's out there. I wouldn't be surprised if, we don't like these wide receivers. They still go. So we'll see what happens. Just to your point of Ted McMillan going top 10, there does seem to be some indication that he's sliding. Mel Kiper and Jordan Reed, I think, had him falling to the Chargers at 22. You had Dane Brugler having him fall to 12. So there's not consensus with him right now. So I think he's in the realm of possibility for 20 overall.
Oh, yeah.
And I know people have compared him to Michael Thomas coming out, Drake London, both these like big slot types that we know Sean Payton has used well. So we'll see what happens with them. But we got to wrap it up. We'll get into the wide receiver conversation a little bit more here going forward. Appreciate everyone coming in. Michael Ronquillo, of course, always big support from Michael on the Facebook side of things. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody else on the Facebook side of things. You're killing it, Michael. Also, shout out to Troy with the big time super chat. Don't even know what to say other than thank you. God bless. If you guys want to support them, we'll definitely glaze you a little bit. God bless you, Troy. Appreciate you. But if not, make sure you guys click the thumbs up on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're at. Obviously, weird times financially for a lot of people. So, it's if you can't do that, it's understandable. But thumbs up are free. Subscriptions are free. Liking the show, sharing the show, that's free. And we really appreciate that. Make sure you're following Eric and I on Twitter. Eric's at Erick Trickel. I'm at Nick Kendell, MHH. Also follow us at Mile High Huddle over on X, Twitter, whatever. Facebook.com. Check us out at Facebook.com, Mile High Huddle, Facebook.com/Mile High Huddle pod, and Facebook.com/Mile High Huddle. And if you haven't done so yet, like I said, over on YouTube, that's the number one way to check us out, especially because Facebook link on StreamYard has been buggy. Subscribe, like, and share over on YouTube. We will see you guys all again next Monday when legally tampering is about to open, and we'll get some more news here. We'll see what happens. Have a great one. Continue to choose kindness and compassion. Go Broncos.